Now, there are a couple different ways that you can organize a persuasive speech. Two of these ways include the problem-cause-solution order and the cause-effect-solution order. Let's talk about each of these in turn. So first, if you do problem-cause-solution order, you should talk about the problem that exists, what's causing it, and its solution. So let's look a little bit more deeply at what goes in each of these main points. First, you have to talk about the problem. And your first job when you're talking about the problem is to clearly state it, to make sure that your audience knows what the problem is and that they understand what the negative impact of it is. In addition, you really have to make the significance of the problem super clear to your audience. You have to let them know why it is that you're even bothering to tell them about this problem. And finally, you have to document the harms that exist with this problem. So tell your audience who is harmed by this specific problem, or what the negative impact of this problem is on the audience, on the world, on whatever it is. But you have to tell us what's so bad about this problem. Next, you have to talk about the cause, and this is what's causing the problem. So you have to talk about the root of the problem, not what the problem is causing, but what is causing the problem, if that makes sense. So you have to talk about what the origin of this problem is, as well as talking about why this problem continues to exist. So talking about why the government hasn't already fixed this problem, or why we as a people haven't already fixed this problem. There has to be some barrier that you can take down with this speech that's currently up that's stopping this problem from being solved. So tell us why the status quo, or the here and now, doesn't solve this problem already. Why is it that this problem continues to be a thing? Why haven't we already solved this problem? Go through that in the cause section. And then finally, you'll talk about the solution. So you'll state the solution, tell our audience what it is that's going to fix this problem, and explain how the solution actually works. So tell us that it solves the problem by doing this, that, and the other. And you want to make sure that you explain how practical the solution is, as well as how desirable it is, because you want your audience to do the thing that you're telling them to do to fix this problem. So you have to tell them why the thing that you're telling them to do is so easy to do, and why it's something that they should want to do. Additionally, in the solutions section, you should be sure that the solutions that you are proposing directly tie back to the problems that you discussed. So if you think about it in that outline format, right, you probably have number 1 is the problem, and then you have problem A, problem B, and problem C. If number 3 is the solution, you should have solution A, solution B, and solution C that tie directly back to those problems. So, as an example, you could give a speech about global warming. Well, you can't give a speech about global warming because I banned that topic, but in theory, right, someone could give a speech about global warming. And they would talk about the problem, and they would say how currently temperatures are rising across the globe and we are experiencing extreme weather. This climate change has led to the disastrous hurricanes that we have seen lately, and it's impacting thousands of lives, right? With Hurricane Maria, for example, Puerto Rico was out of power for over 6 months, and it severely impacted millions of people's lives and killed hundreds. So I've documented the problem, right? I've said that that climate change exists, and that the temperatures are rising, and that it's causing all this extreme weather, and it's killing people and causing power outages and all of these different things, right? Made the significance clear, documented my harms. Then I go into what's actually causing the problem. So I talk about how we rely too much on our cars, or that the meat industry is out of control, and that there's all of these greenhouse gases that are building up in the atmosphere that are leading to this increase in global temperature. And I specifically am going to talk about the animal industry, and specifically the beef industry, because cows actually produce a lot of methane, which is a greenhouse gas, and that makes the global temperatures rise even further. And this problem continues to exist because people continue to eat beef. We love our hamburgers, we love our steaks, and we continue to support the beef industry, the cow industry, which increases the amount of methane that exists in our atmosphere because we are increasing the number of cows to feed that need. And the status quo doesn't solve because, like I was saying, people keep eating this meat, and the amount of meat that Americans eat is ridiculous. And we keep making more cows so that we can feed more people more beef. So that's what's causing this problem, right? With more cows, they burp and fart more and more methane, which feeds into the greenhouse effect, which makes global temperatures rise, etc. So the solution is to eat less beef. Because if we eat less beef, we are going to decrease the number of cows that are needed to feed Americans. And if we decrease the number of cows that are needed, we are in turn decreasing the amount of methane, which then brings down the greenhouse gas effect and can help us to lower global temperatures. So I'm explaining how it works right now, right? And this is practical because I'm not asking you to stop eating beef altogether. I'm simply saying to maybe cut it down to once a week or perhaps once a month. But simply reducing the amount of beef that we eat can help to significantly decrease the amount of methane that we are producing in the air. So that's problem, cause, solution. I told you about the problem of climate change, what's causing climate change, right? All the methane, and then the solution of eating less beef. Cause-effect solution is very similar, but it's just kind of flipped. So first you have to talk about the cause. So you talk about what's causing it, why it continues to exist, and why the status quo doesn't solve. So all of the same things that you did in the middle of the other speech, you're now doing first thing, right? So in this case, you have to present the problem really quickly in the introduction, and then talk about what's causing it, before you can finally go into the effects of the problem. So this is where you're describing negative outcomes that exist because of this problem. In addition, you have to elaborate what will happen if this problem continues to exist, before finally describing the ultimate impact of this problem. So going back to the climate change example, right, I would say very briefly in my introduction that I'm talking about the problem of climate change, and then I would go immediately into that explanation of the cows and the methane and eating all of the beef and all of those sorts of causes that I talked about in my first speech. And then I would go into the effects. So I first describe the negative outcomes, right? I say that the more that we eat all of this beef, the more methane goes into our atmosphere. And the more methane that goes into our atmosphere, the more we're going to be seeing these extreme weather patterns. And more people are going to be affected by this. In addition, right, maybe the ice caps are going to melt, and that's going to raise global sea temperatures, which is going to then flood parts of our country, and people are going to be displaced from their homes. They aren't going to have as much access to clean food and water, and they're going to have to move into more densely packed urban areas where poverty is going to increase and hunger is going to increase. People are going to die. All of these things, right? You have to describe that ultimate negative impact. Usually it's going to end in some kind of death or economic collapse or nuclear war or something like that. It doesn't have to be that extreme, obviously, but you have to describe what that ultimate bad thing is, because you have to get your audience to a place where they want to hear your solution. And you do all of the same things here, right? You state the solution, explain how it works, explain its practicality and its desirability, so that your audience sees the problem that exists, sees what's causing it. Remember, not what's caused by it in that cause section, but what is causing it, what the origin of the problem is, what its negative effects are, right? So this is what's caused by it, is the effects section. And then tell us how we can fix that problem. You want your audience begging for that solution by the time you're done describing the effects. So really, you might be asking yourself, how do I pick one or the other? How do I know whether I should go problem, cause, solution, or cause, effect, solution? And my answer is to just kind of play around with it, right? When you look at it, the problem and effects paragraphs are very similar, and the cause paragraphs are similar as well, and the solutions are the same. So you can think of this speech kind of like a puzzle. So you have these 3 different pieces, and you just have to rearrange them and figure out what order makes the most sense for your particular topic.